I'm Rob Trzynski. This is Symposium, where we talk about the ideas at the basis of a free society. My guest today is Jaroslav Romanchuk, a senior economist with the Office of Simple Solutions and Reforms in Kyiv, in Ukraine. Thanks for coming on.
I'm honored to be with you. It's always like a family of friends and freedom lovers worldwide.
I certainly hope so. Now, the one I want to start with is that the last time I talked to you, just a little over a year ago from today, you swore you were very confident that Russia was not going to invade
Yeah.
Ukraine. So what went wrong?
First of all, a lot of people who are military experts, they got it wrong. They based their ideas on number of troops, of reasons of invasion, of the potential, of the consequence of invasion. So if you weigh rationally pros and cons of invasion, definitely you would come to the conclusion that invasion should never happen. And just a week before the invasion, there was this Munich security conference where 65% of the present, and just have in mind that this conference is attended by the top of the world in expertise and security, the military, and all that is with that area of expertise. And 65% of them said that this kind of invasion will never happen. So that was I as an ordinary economist, just I thought that it would never happen because I
Well,
said, well, it will be like suicidal for the parts to do that.
and as I recall, the contention between us at the time, because I was more convinced that it would happen, the
Yeah.
contention was the key question was how rational a decision maker Putin was. Did he actually believe his own propaganda? I guess my view was we had talked about this great incident of him playing hockey with Lukashenko, the dictator of
Yeah.
Belarus.
About
And they had this ridiculous hockey game where these two 60-year-old, out of shape 60-year-old guys score 7 goals against professionals.
yeah.
And it's clearly one of these setups where, sort of like Idi Amin always winning the soccer matches in Uganda. And I guess the question was, your position on it was this was an example of how Putin doesn't take risks. He only goes into a contest if he knows it's already rigged that he's going to win ahead of time. And my take on it was he's been in this bubble where he always wins everything, and that leads to overconfidence. And so I think where you were right is you had said a year ago, or a little over a year ago, but a few weeks before the invasion, that Putin can't win. He doesn't, the forces he has arrayed to invade Ukraine can't possibly achieve that goal. And I think we saw that was true. And I think what I got right about it was he was going to do it anyway because
Yeah.
he was so fooled. He believes so much of his own propaganda.
Now we have much more information in order to evaluate that particular part of our history, but I would go back like 6 months before the invasion, when CIA boss, when people from Biden administration visited Moscow, when Biden met Putin in Geneva in Switzerland, and they allegedly knew that about his plans. The question is, why didn't they deliver any assistance before, if they were so sure that Putin would invade Ukraine in spite of all? So they say, well, Ukraine should have been ready for that. But okay, Ukraine didn't have weapons, didn't have military capacity to enhance it. What it could in that situation.
Yeah.
But what about the West? What about NATO? What about all these security people? America had the budget of about $600 billion, or even $800 billion in 2022. NATO budget is about $1 trillion. And here we have this major security threat, which is Russia, but all security people, and that is well indicated in the reform of this Munich conference, the security index, where Russia wasn't even in top 10 threats of the world. Unlike today, or like this Munich Security Conference happened a few weeks ago, where Russia was the top security threat in Ukraine, in all G7 countries, excluding Italy, I believe.
Yeah.
So there's a major shift in security perception, and I believe that Putin, when we have this enough information, he believed that first he relied on the he counted on this blitzkrieg, very fast 3-5 day operation. They thought that they controlled many. Still, they control many positions in the security, probably structures. They have the soft power spies inside Ukraine. I don't think that everybody was eliminated. And that time, he believed that the Zelensky was a very weak president. He's like a comedian, so he will never be able to resist. He will be offered to leave. And the first major mistake was that they did not take into account the hard character and resolution of Mr. Zelensky. He turned out to be a real leader. He didn't want to have a ride. He wanted ammunition and weapons, which was not delivered. And still, 1 year into the war, the biggest appeal to the West from Ukraine is give us necessary weapons and we'll finish the war within 1 year in 2023, which is not the issue. So we have like 10 packages of sanctions. We have a Rammstein sittings almost like every month, and still we don't have enough artillery, ammunition, planes, tanks. Everything is missing. So why on... Yeah.
One thing I see, though, is that, we could talk about why people didn't anticipate this more. But one thing that fascinates me about this is, and it's as a commentator on politics for 25 years, one of the things I've grown to really appreciate is how much you don't know until the event happens. Because
it happens.
And a lot of it is because, you can predict certain things. You can talk about what the conditions are, but there are decisions that are going to be made by key people like Zelensky. And I think a lot of people expected, and certainly Putin expected, he'd put a couple thousand VDV soldiers, they'd walk into Kyiv, and Zelensky would get in a helicopter and he'd be gone to the West. So there's decisions made by key people, but there's also decisions made by, millions of individuals.
Yeah, exactly. That's my second
ground.
point.
Yeah.
My second point, which Putin grossly misunderstood, underevaluated, because he believed that, nobody trusted Zelensky. The authorities are on their own wave. They're corrupt. They're like oligarchs around. And so that would be the same behavior as it was back in 2014, which was dramatically different. And this time when Russia had their paratroopers in Gostomel, 30, 40 kilometers from Kiev, I was in Kiev that time, and I felt this kind of danger of Kiev being occupied. I got a lot of warnings from American friends, organizations, European. They wanted to get me out of the country, but I said I would stay with my friends here and we'll fight with the invaders. So the reason Kiev was defended and this first part of the war was different than Putin planned was not because of the army, not because of the generals, but because of this voluntary militia which took initiative in their own hands, and they arranged self-defense at their own expense in their own way. It wasn't centralized, it wasn't planned, it was the spontaneous reaction of the people who hated the invader, who hated this Nazi Russia, and they did their best to protect it. They sacrificed their lives, they sacrificed everything they had, but they managed to show to Russians that it's not 2014. We are fighting for our own country. We're fighting for freedom. Get out of it. Get out of Ukraine. And the good thing is that Ukrainian Zelensky and his very close circle, they managed to keep control. They showed this powerful signal that I'm the president. I fight with you to the very end. They were ready to die there because, as you know, in 23rd of February, Polish President Duda had a meeting with Zelensky, and Zelensky told him that could be probably their last meeting. So they bid farewell to each other, with this sad feeling that it might be the end, because again, no Western country embassies in Kiev, all of them were evacuated. It was like if American government or NATO or European security people knew that this kind of thing would happen, they left Ukraine without help, without any assistance, only with moral support. And that is something that really should be considered. Otherwise, if you knew it and you want it, but what could Zelensky possibly deliver at that particular moment? And again, knowing that Russia had many spies, Russia used this tactics, and again, when this unique unity of Zelensky, of the army, of the voluntary people who fought for their country, and that is the major piece of history and that major factor why Ukraine beat Russia for the battle for Kiev.
All right. Well, now you talked a little bit about the many people, including myself, who were concerned for your safety. Because, let's back up a little on the history here, which is that you're from Belarus. You were essentially a dissident in Belarus, fighting against the Lukashenko regime, and you had to flee from there to Kyiv, and a lot of us thought, well, out of the frying pan and into the fire, to use an American expression.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that has a Eastern European equivalent, but this idea of you're out of danger in one place and you're into possibly even worse danger.
There is an alternative for that. There's an alternative for that. Izagnat of Polemy, it says from the it's out of the frying pan into the fire. It's the same thing.
That's kind of it's a universal idea. But then the interesting thing is, since then, your family has been able to leave Belarus and go to Poland, and that's not at all unusual. A lot of women and children, have fled Ukraine, have been able to find a place in Poland, and that's one of the other interesting. We talk about the decisions people make when the crisis comes. You could say ahead of time, maybe this will happen, maybe that will happen. One of the most interesting things I've seen is this formation of this tremendous unity especially across Eastern Europe, and the people who are sort of on the front line with Russia, from Finland and Norway and Sweden all the way down through the Baltic states, Poland, the Czechia, and all these people sort of gathering
Bulgaria,
together.
Romania, all of them were in.
Well, there's a few exceptions like Serbia and Hungary that are a little shaky, but. There's been this just tremendous sort of pan-Eastern European or pan-Eastern alliance that has cemented, and I think that's a very interesting development that could have an impact in the whole region.
Well, that as I followed this Munich Security Council closely, and the explanation for this kind of attitude was revealed by a few top politicians, namely Minister of Defense of Germany, Mrs. Baerbock. And she said, when she was asked about, because before the war, there was a different approach to Russia, to treating Russia by Poland, by Baltic states. They knew what Russia stood up for. They knew that Russia used energy as a geopolitical weapon. They knew that Russia is about lies, falsification, using all cunning methods to have an impact and to impose agenda that is beneficial to Russia. Russia has a widespread, very ingrained network of spies and soft power people inside European Union countries. And Russian and the Polish people and Lithuanians and Estonians warned Germany, Italy, France about it. And they were like, okay, you have this, old pain of from the Soviet Union. And they were revenged. They said, okay, you see, in the conference, top Estonian, Polish politicians said, well, it's time to overhaul security policy of the European Union, and it's time to think over the mission and function and the mandate of NATO, because Minister of Defense and Foreign Policy of Germany said that the reason we treated Russia like that was that we thought that war would never happen in Europe again. So for Germans, French people, Italians, this concept of war was passé. Well, it would never happen in the future. While Russia was getting ready for the war. And that's why when Biden signed the treaty with North Pipe, second gas pipe, right?
Nord
That
Stream
was
2, yeah.
yeah, that was really North Stream. That was really something as a kind of a final defeat of this understanding of what's going on in this part of the world. So and the weakness of analytical operators, or for example, Rand Corporation, which said that Kiev would fall within 3 days. All security people, including CIA, all analytical centers were wrong about the potential of the Ukrainian society in the first place. They were like, okay, let's see, a Russian army, second biggest army, second most powerful army in the world, and against Ukraine. What is Ukraine? It's kind of non-existent entity, and as a result, but reality turned out to be dramatically different because of this element of decentralized resistance and the power of this of the hearts who fought for freedom, because they don't fight for the government, for the oligarchs, for Zelensky. They are fighting for their own land, and that's the major factor that changed and now made all European countries, including Germany, including Italy, and even France, to overhaul and change. And even now, NATO said that. Starting from the second part of 2023, we will restart making modern weaponry, ammunition. So I think that,
Yeah,
one of the
it takes
reasons, yeah.
Go ahead.
One of the reasons probably NATO countries did not deliver weapons and artillery and tanks up to that point was that probably they never audited the status of these weapons in their own. So just imagine if they spent $1 trillion every year. As it turned out, they have malfunctioning tanks, rusted ammunition, artillery. Well, that's the question is, where is the money? What did you do?
Yeah.
What kind of state or security system you guys have?
Yeah, I think another thing that another reason why more weapons and equipment wasn't poured into Ukraine is I really think there were a lot of people who were worried Ukraine will fall in 3 days, and all the tanks and everything,
Yep.
those will just be donations to the Russian military. And so, like I said, one of the factors here is you don't know what's going to happen until it happens, until people make the choices. So,
no, but Robert, okay, I understand, right? March, April, but then in May,
yeah, definitely. Afterwards,
but in May, then you have land lease program law, which we thought that well, finally we have land lease, we will have necessary ammunition, and finally we will win because we had this open.
But NATO really wasn't. But NATO really wasn't prepared for this. They were not prepared for the idea that we're going to have a return of war. But so we talked about the geopolitical impact this is having. I want to talk more about sort of the impact it has on domestic policies. And one of the things I want to talk a lot about is, among people who are sort of, want to do moral equivalence in this and say, well, Ukraine isn't really any better than Russia. They will point to the fact that Ukraine has, and has had, and I think to some extent still has, a highly corrupt system and this is going to be, I think we can agree that Russia can't win this. It's a matter of how much pain they can cause over the next year or so, while they are defeated. But there's going to be a post-war, the big post-war challenge, or the big challenge for the post-war era is going to be, how do you reform this system? What impact do you think this war is going to have in terms of how people look at how the country is run and how it can be changed? Because clearly the Ukrainian people want something other than a Putin-style kleptocracy. How do they go about doing that? And do you think that people have an idea of how that's going to be done?
Well, that's what I've been doing in Ukraine, and my Ukrainian friend said that, well, we should thank Lukashenko for sending you out of your country so that you can deliver reforms here in Ukraine. The truth is that for the last 20, 30 years, Russia treated Ukraine and made partnerships with local oligarchs and people in different layers of power and decision making. They robbed and stole both from Russia and Ukraine, and they turned Ukraine into this territory where they made money. They were in control of the military, of the energy sector, of transport, of money. So the penetration of Russian capital, both from intelligence, from mafia structures, was tremendous. And those people who were in fact spies of the Russian evil empire were perceived by the West as Ukrainians themselves. And still they are there because, unfortunately, the Ukrainian government has failed to cleanse all these elements of the Russian influence and political and financial and others people. Another factor that was contributed to this idea that Ukraine is very corrupt was that many Western people who came here and worked in different organizations, they were partners of the Russians rather than Ukrainians. And so they took part in different conferences, and Russian oligarchs, Russian invaders, they brainwashed their Western counterparts for many, many years that Ukraine is a failed state, that Ukraine is not a state at all, that Lenin created this state, completely falsifying history. So now when the world is finally learning about the real history of Ukraine and Russia, they say, well, but this is absolutely different from the story we heard for dozens of years. So disinformation campaign preceded the invasion of 2014 and invasion 2022, of course. And in addition, Russians were much more aggressive in forming soft power both in the United States and in the European Union. That is why they portrayed Ukraine as a failed state, as corrupt state, as the state that just failed. But the Ukrainians in 2005, they wanted change, and the elites did not deliver. In 2014, people revolted against the corrupt Yanukovych and did not deliver. And when Zelensky took over, he also wanted change. But
again, his whole campaign, the whole way he got to be president, just to remind people, is that he played a fictional president who was a crusader against corruption.
Yeah, absolutely. And when he got into power, again, he was surrounded by the people who were somehow marred with the connection with Russia. So, but what I saw is that in this last 20 years, there wasn't a single comprehensive attempt to offer free market reform proposals for Ukraine. So what I did when the war started, and I thought that I would do that after the war, but again I had much time. When bombs fall and rockets are shot, well, what you do is to divert attention from these dangers. You work intellectually, you write. And I finished writing the book, which I called New West Ukrainian Dream, which had two comprehensive reform proposals, which cover all elements of what we should do during the war and after the war. And it has answers to all these questions: what kind of monetary system we should have, what taxation we should have, what regulation, what social security. It's not just, okay, let's stand up for tax revolution and that's it. It doesn't fly. And the reason I was approached by the security people, by these people who really want change, was that they saw how detailed I analyzed the proposals made by international organizations. When you analyze what IMF, World Bank, OECD, CSIS, American organization, offered to Ukraine, that the same development economics model which would lead to corruption over like a reset of oligarchy rather than a chance for freedom in Ukraine. So
I want to back up and talk about that a little bit, because I think it's something that people don't understand, and it's something I think especially American sort of center-left liberals in America, who are often very sympathetic to Ukraine's cause, very much against the Russians. What they don't understand is the extent to which sort of having a big government, centrally managed economy, to the extent to which that is a major factor that fuels the corruption.
Absolutely. First of all, it's when you have the government which performs over 7,000 functions, when you don't have independent judiciary, when you don't have highly effective regulatory framework, when you do not have the human capacity to manage this, to govern this complex system, what you do is you concentrate your efforts on the basic functions of the government, which is security, safety, and basic elements of the country's existence, which is like energy supply and the border management and stuff like that. So again, in this model that is offered by the West, and by the West I don't mean that like bunch of guys which are freak professors. These are all respectable organizations like McKinsey, like all this like big commercial organizations, Accenture, Boston Consulting. They believe that this kind of approach would work in Ukraine, but they ignore in the fundamental thing that they ignore. I don't see why, the government failure. So my latest book was, before I wrote this New West book about Ukraine, was The Theory and Practice of Government Failure about the development and emerging economies. And that's obvious if you see the reality. When somebody just learned how to drive a bicycle, you will never let him run a Lamborghini or sophisticated plane, because he would crash. And the crash in the economic policy is that the attempt to implement the proposals that were drafted by these organizations would inevitably lead to corruption.
Now, that's something I want to point out, is that in America and in Western Europe, you have this long tradition of we're often overregulated and have government that's too big, but the bureaucracies are well established over years. They function relatively smoothly, and there's also this whole 100-year history, probably like 150-year history really, of civil service reform. Guys in the 1880s who were out there getting rid of the spoils system, which was this like flagrantly corrupt system where if you were a political supporter of a certain party, you would get a job in the government which you could use to enrich yourself. They had all these systems put into place over a period of 150 years to sort of create that rule of law and to reduce, I don't say they're to eliminate it, but to reduce greatly the amount of open flagrant corruption in the administration of government. And if you don't have that history and you say, hey, let's have the government, let's pour billions of dollars in aid in and have the government doing all these things, a lot of that aid is going to end up, it's going to end up the way money ends up in Russia, which is it's going to end up as yachts in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, absolutely. It was like, when, all these models start with assumptions. Let's assume that the Ukraine has honest government full of integrity and thriving and eager to deliver a new model. Which, again, with this kind of assumptions, you would go anywhere. You'll go to resetting oligarchy. My idea is, when it doesn't matter what kind of, ideology you belong to, Republicans, Democrats, liberals, social democrats, it's pretty, should be science-based. First, you analyze what you have. Existence exists. If there is no rule of law, no tradition, as you described, like 100 years of tradition of, of governing a country. So you cannot assume that somehow, as your good wishers come, and suddenly it will emerge. It will never emerge. One of the biggest mistakes that I think that Ukraine made in the first year of the war is that they failed to turn into this war economy model, which does not require as much regulation and ministries as before the war. So before the war, and that's again when IMF just in December 2022, they published a report believing that Ukraine should go to the pre-war mode. My criticism is that, well, before the war, Ukraine was the poorest European country. It did not deliver on the economic growth. It did not deliver on prosperity. Why do you offer and suggest European government going that way? It's unprofessional. It's you are part of the problem.
And I think the role of the role of the IMF and international organizations. I mean, one of my concerns is that we're providing a huge amount of not just military aid, but also of economic aid to Ukraine, and Ukraine needs it. And I think the West owes it to them because Ukraine is on the front lines. They're fighting this war for us, and we have a tremendous interest in their winning that. Because if Ukraine doesn't win, then it's Poland next, and it's the Baltic states next, and things get worse. Things get worse for Europe from here. But at the same time, with all that aid pouring in, you just know that there are the corrupt structures that are going to to divert it, and it's hard to reform the corrupt structures when you're also pouring money into it.
Yeah, but again, look at this money. If you have, that's again when I suggested the Ukrainian government to overhaul the budgetary policy and essentially turn into this traditional pre-war model into this like a more military concentrated approach. For example, you have like 10.7 million pensioners. So if the West wants to help Ukraine, it shouldn't go to the government to get this money into the coffers of the government. Instead, pay pensions for the whole pensioners, and again, liquidate taxation that would lead to that are aimed at paying pensions. Likewise with other sources of revenue. So if you want transparency, have a supervisory board where the members of the donor community should be present, and change it. The Ukrainian government changed budget law in 2022 13 times. Why on earth do you have this process in the first place if your country is in the state of war? Your structure of the economy is broken. Your employment structure is broken. Your export-import structure is broken. Why do you, and then in this case, when you have this false logic of having counter-cyclical or cyclical policy, it's like sick. It will never work. So it's absolutely contrary to science. And my idea is always, when you really want to have an alternative, base your arguments, your program on science. And science is that in this situation, let entrepreneurs, let people take care of themselves, let people take risks for themselves. In the first months of the war, Ukrainians were given weapons, and we didn't have mass shootings. We didn't have explosions. People knew how to operate weapons and have grenades and how to make Molotov cocktails against Russian invaders. In this case, why do you have the sophisticated customs, for example, that made goods and services much more difficult to cross and make them more expensive? Liquidate it. Just, if you want to have some money, have 5% import tariff flat on every goods without any documentation. If you demand 12 documents and you have to stand in line for days in order to cross the border, what do you control? Do you control, do you take care of the life, security, and safety of the people? Or do you care about the benefits for the customs officers and these people who control it, for the mafia people?
Yeah.
And these are simple approaches but again, when we talk about this delivery of weapons and everything, when you deliver weapons to the military, to the army, you have General Zaluzhny, who is a great guy, and he takes care of it. So it would be more like not in the hands of some bureaucrats, but deliver it directly to the people who control it, who can use it. In this case, this is the best way. So unlike the economic policy, the military policy or the military operation was definitely much better organized. That's why Ukrainian army is smaller than Russian army. Ukrainian army, especially in the first half of the year in 2022, it didn't have weapons, it didn't have shells, it didn't have ammunition. So it was like defenseless. But still, it resisted the Russian invasion. And Putin, when he believed that Kiev would have fallen within 3 days, he knew it, thinking that Ukrainians would not deliver because they had nothing to fight with. And that's the question I want to address to the NATO people and the American people and Germany. If you knew about the invasion, why didn't you at least arm Ukrainians with the basic weapons so that they can resist? And there's no answer for that.
Well, so I want to talk though about the future of Ukraine. So one of the, and it's something you've been sort of moving towards here, which is I talked to another Ukrainian last year who said that he thinks that Ukraine is going to have to go to what he called more of an American model. Now, I think he's being a little over optimistic about what the actual American model is, but it was this idea of, by necessity, Ukraine is going to have to put a lot more of its budget, a lot more of its government is going to be oriented towards national defense. And even if when the war ends and Russia's still going to be there, they're still going to have to be ready to deter. So there's going to have to be a lot more money spent on national defense and less money that's available, because it's a poor country, less money that's available to go to the welfare state. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that's maybe the American model of 70 years ago, or as opposed to the American model of today. But still, it is more, unlike the typical sort of Western European model, where you have a very large welfare state, and up until the year or two ago, they were spending extremely little on defense. Ukraine's going to have to be the opposite.
Yeah, well, let's see that. We will have something of a unique model because we are facing the following bifurcation points, so points where we should change things as they were before the war. First, international legal system does not exist. It's like, it turned to be inefficient, and UN should be disbanded. It didn't operate well. It did not deliver on anything. Red Cross did not deliver on anything. MAGATE, which is an atomic agency, did not deliver. That's this scandalous situation when Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station was occupied by Russians, and this MAGATE people came up there and said, well, nothing, it's okay, that's almost normal. Then we have the international cooperation development system also in tatters. It did not deliver. NATO did not deliver. So we must design a new system of law and security. In this case, we have the Ukrainian army, which definitely would be on the front line of the battle with whatever state or states would emerge after the collapse of the empire of evil. And that definitely will be the function that Ukraine would offer to the table as a NATO country, as a European Union country. And of course, Ukraine should spend at least 5% of GDP on defense, but at the same time, it should be a kind of a big partnership thing. Ukraine would not be able to deliver all the expenses itself. It should rely on the activities and essentially on assistance of European Union and America and other countries that care for the peace in Europe. And in this case, again, one of the most interesting part would be to integrate security and arms, weapons manufacturers in Ukraine, which would be also very good. I mean, because Ukraine has a vast potential in this area, but it's undercapitalized, and using modern technologies, definitely European and American companies would be interested in arming and creating a very powerful force in this part of the world. So
And Ukraine used to be a major center of arms
yeah,
production for the
yeah,
Soviet Union.
absolutely. And so it produced, and so that's where I think that the idea that Ukraine should be integrated into NATO and new European and global security architecture is absolutely necessary. So, and Ukrainians will be ready for that. Secondly, which is very important, again, we don't need Russia as an energy partner because Russia proved to be energy like gangster in this is part of the world. And Ukraine has a lot of oil, a lot of gas, a lot of electricity capacity. So integrating Ukraine into the single energy market in the European Union is absolutely like logical and natural.
So if
Third,
in other words, if German industry needs energy, they should get it from
yeah,
Ukraine instead of from Russia.
absolutely. And again, in order to have this cooperation, well, of course, and it didn't happen before because Russian oligarchs did not let European, Canadian, American business into this energy sector in Ukraine. It wasn't the decision of Ukrainians themselves, but yeah, they were like, okay, why do you need this? As there was a lot of energy coming from imported from Russia, from Belarus, so they invested into their own energy sector and did not let any foreign investors to come to Ukraine, and that would definitely would change. The third element, which is very important, is to develop and to invest into the agricultural production. As you know, really, Ukraine is one of the biggest, probably, comparative advantages Ukraine has is its agriculture. And again, it's low tech, it's fragmented, it's not well developed. So fortunately, they had the law on private property of land passed, but it had some limitations. So limitations should be abolished. And again, full-fledged agricultural business should be part of Ukrainian program. And again, no government involvement in here because right now we have grain, we have corn, we have maize, we have sunflower, and all of them are regulated, fragmented, licensed. All of the things should be abolished.
And that's one of the lessons from the war, I think, though, because I remember seeing that, in some of the early areas of the war that, things like collection of taxes was suspended and certain regulations were suspended as part of a temporary emergency. And I was thinking, well, if it works so well to help you recover from a temporary emergency, how much better might that work as a normal way of doing things and to allow much faster and the development and growth that the country needs.
In March 2022, we drafted those proposals to the government, and fortunately, they were adopted. Then, by May, I delivered the whole comprehensive military or like state of war economic policy. Unfortunately, it was not considered as a single approach to changing the economic policy. And then these the guys that nomenclature people that were part of this schemers and oligarchic state, they somehow, they came back with vengeance. So, and they were supported by the West unfortunately. So in July, they had this in Switzerland conference called Lugano Conference. Lugano, it's the name of the Swiss city. And they delivered this restructuring, post-war restructuring program where Ukrainian government wanted like $750 billion. But the plan was like a centralized state plan economy, which was absolutely outrageous. I criticized it severely. And I said that no, it shouldn't happen because in Ukraine, it's a paradox of the situation. You have all the support of the West. You have intellectual support, technical support, military, financial support. How come that your macroeconomic policy is much worse than that of Russia? It's unbelievable. You have
that leads to a question, which is anybody listening in the Ukrainian government? Because I know that that these things are very hard. There's a long history that you're trying to change to some extent, and it can be very hard to do. But I know you've got a lot of your own efforts going on here, and you have a book coming out. So I want to talk to you about basically what are you doing, and is anybody listening to you?
So our organization provides intellectual support and makes recommendations to the government, to parliaments, to office of president, to Security Council on what should be done. But again, the problem with decision making in Ukraine is that it's not well functioning. It's not effective because it has a lot of conflicts of interest. The government does not exist, in fact. The government is there. You have prime minister, you have ministers, but they have secondary importance in decision making because there is a parallel decision making process which is much more important. The parliament was also like in fact it existed, but again there is low debate what should be done in order to facilitate the or to ensure the functioning of the economy. So this pre-war ills and the defects of the economy and the governance system are still there. So what we do is what I do. I try to reach out for individuals who can have an impact and let's say at the table where Zelensky is, where the people who care about the people and the way that Ukraine should be run after the war. And that's very difficult because some schemers are still there and they don't want free flow and free competition of information around. So what I do is I publish a lot of articles, like I make like probably 10 information products every week. So we have articles, video programs, streams, national television, YouTube channels, you name it. All I can do. Then we talk with business associations. We talk with influential influencers in the media field to tell them about the real problems. For example, there is a problem that is unique for Ukraine. Fortunately, you don't have value-added tax, but again, Europeans even don't understand it because in Europe, some institutions, some even taxes work in a different way. But in Ukraine, there is a VAT huge problem of blocking invoices. And half of Ukrainian business is affected by that. And tax inspectors and tax mafia turned that into their source of revenues in the time of war. So I made this calculation and told them about the damage this particular procedure cost Ukrainian economy the state of war, which is like billions of dollars a month. And then suddenly this issue was raised by President Zelensky, by other people, and they reacted to that. So right now we are in the process of, they cannot ignore us. They understand that we are with them in this boat of Ukrainian economy and Ukrainian fight against Russia. But still, we are in the minority yet. Because people, for these 30 years, people have never been exposed to real free market agenda. So they knew, for example, something that is really unique for Ukraine in bad sense of the word is they don't understand that prices should be stable, inflation should be low. When they say, well, National Bank delivered, had a good job, its performance is good. And they say, okay, what's the inflation in Ukraine? 27, 30%, and you call it good, high quality delivery? Give it a break. Or one international organization awarded Minister of Finance of Ukraine for good fiscal policy. The good fiscal policy, for you to understand, is 25% of GDP budget deficit and government expenditures in 2022 exceeding 75% of GDP. I say Russia and Belarus, totalitarian state, did not do that. You essentially nationalize the economy as a response to the war, which is absurd. Don't do that. And again, this kind of, when you bang, bang, bang all the time, sometimes, you have some important doors open and you are heard of. But so we are still in the process of, when the book is ready and when we have this tour around the country and when we have political parties and different NGOs that are influential to sign and to support it, definitely our capacity to deliver would be much bigger. In addition, I hope that my work with the Security Council would be also productive because I would package the reforms that are needed into the national economic security concept, which is also very important. So what does it mean to be secure from the economic point of view for Ukraine? And again, you talk about free market, you talk about private property protection, you talk about free competition, you talk about all these necessary things, and about the size of the government, which is very important.
And your argument is basically to be that as a national security imperative is that you have to have a strong economy, and to have a strong economy,
Absolutely.
you have to have a less regulated, less taxed.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And you know, it's interesting that I've seen some things about why the Ukrainian military did so well versus the Russians, why the Russians did so poorly, is that you know the Russians very much have in their military a top down, the officers, and if the officers aren't there giving the orders, nothing happens. Whereas the American model and the Western model of military is a lot of emphasis on individual initiative by each soldier, you know, by each soldier and each junior officers out there, that they're all taking their individual initiative, individual problem solving. And this was something that we had, one of the good things we'd done before the war is we had successfully passed on some of that training to Ukraine. But I think it's sort of ironic that, you know, this is the key to the military success. It's also the key to economic success, is the idea of focus on individual effort and initiative.
Decentralized decision making, that's core in the system of private property. And again, when you have this situation in the economy, which is like 60% of the economy is in state hands, you have the dominance of the government in the banking sector. You have there is a financial openness indicator index, and Ukraine applies 13 out of 13 restrictions on capital movement. How could it be? I said, my solution is very simple. Move on to multi-currency system. You must legalize hryvnia, of course, but then 5 more currencies. So let people choose what currency they prefer. And the currency of choice of ordinary Ukrainians is US dollar. That's, we ask anybody, you ask about prices of a car, of an apartment, it's always in dollars, because dollar is much more stable and it's not that weak and inflated as hryvnia. As one of the arguments I have here against national bank is that, okay, guys, you remember that all these our soldiers are on the front. They are paid like 100,000 hryvnias a month. But if they don't convert that into dollars, so if you have inflation 30% a year, you steal 30% from them. You steal 30% from the soldiers that defend their country and risk their lives. And that's immoral. So instead of going through these sophisticated models of how inflation influences economic growth, you make simple images that are much more powerful.
Great. All right. Well, I really appreciate you talking to me, and I wish you luck. Now, you have a book coming out called New West.
Yeah, New West, Economic Ukrainian Dream. It is like over 500-page book. It will be in Ukrainian Russian. And now I'm talking to Polish libertarians to have it translated into Polish. And hopefully I also will find somebody who would support that. I want it to be translated into English, because it's not just about Ukraine. Ukrainian Dream and New West is a concept that we should go back to the old times when political and economic powers were separated, when there was really small government which did not distribute more than 5-10% of GDP, where people take their own risks and innovated and created new products, new technologies based on solid, good money, which was on gold standard. So now it's time for us to offer to the world a new development concept based on our ideas on free market and objectivism. And then I think that right now it's really the time for the world to listen.
Well, thanks for talking to me. I wish you best in those efforts.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm Rob Trzynski. My guest today has been Jaroslav Romanchuk of the Office for Simple Solutions and Reforms in Ukraine. If you enjoyed this conversation, please hit like on YouTube. Please subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform. And for more discussion of ideas at the basis of a free society, you can always go to symposium.substack.com. Thank you for joining the conversation.